here to get us back in perspective. March 2nd, Roscoe Howard sends out the rant. Eleanor Myers obviously reads it because she doesn't say, don't send this out anymore, or I read up to page 2 halfway through and decided you don't know the facts and therefore I didn't read it, or get your facts. You know. She corrects him on when the picture was taken. And then she says she endorses his outrage, but I am just having trouble getting her on the record. That's on March 2, before the 17th conference call. The next day, on March 3, she says, the problem I'm having with 1D3 is that I did not think McNair had an adequate opportunity during his interviews to discuss what happened in that call. The staff told him it occurred in 2005, not 2006, and it was generally a very confusing piece of questioning. It's not just using the wrong date, the questioning was confusing. And that really shows up in the Lake interview. It just jumps all over the place. And then she says again, even after the conference call, on Tuesday night, March 2nd, on the record, I am not comfortable charging him with lying. And then Britton Banowski on March 3rd, after the conference call. My recollection was, while I didn't find him credible, referring to McNair, on most issues it was his word against Lake's word. And Lake's transcript was really choppy on his relationship with McNair. The real question would seem whether he knew of Lake's plan to have the agency and that he was giving benefits to Reggie. The question is not whether he told the truth about knowing Lloyd Lake. That's not a violation to have met Lloyd Lake, to have known Lloyd Lake, to have been Lloyd Lake's brother. None of that is an NCAA violation. By the way, he wasn't Lloyd Lake's brother. The only thing, the question was whether he knew of Lake's plan to have the agency and that he was giving benefits to Reggie Bush. And he says, it is challenging for me to make a finding. He came around in the end, didn't he? Because somebody said it was unanimous, even though other people said no vote was ever taken. That's why this is a tough one. But I will defer to others on it. You deliberate, we want all 12 of you. Not one of you or 3 of you. We want all 12 of you to deliberate. Not, I will defer to others on it. Then, Rod Uphoff, recognizing on March 4th, 2 days after the conference call, 1 day after those 2 emails I just showed you, sends a message to Shep Cooper. Now, they haven't made a finding yet regarding Todd McNair. It's still stuck in the Netherlands because the evidence is so bad and supportive. He even says, we are not going to achieve consensus regarding McNair, no matter how many calls we have, and we are going over ground that we have already discussed. They had been over and over it again for 10 days or more, and they couldn't reach consensus because in order to reach consensus, they'd have to have evidence of what happened in the call, and didn't have that. That was reliable in any way, and so they wrote it differently, didn't they? But he says, I would encourage you to respond that you are writing something up and we will schedule another meeting after the draft. They're not, I heard testimony in this case from NCAA people that you're not supposed to write a draft until findings are made. So there have been no findings against McNair by the committee, but Rod Uphoff is telling Shep Cooper, write up a draft, and Shep Cooper, who's been there for years and years and years and knows how it works, does? How often does this kind of stuff go on in these hearings, where coaches' careers and lives are at stake? By the way, some of this testimony was done on videotape, where we went back and took the testimony of the witnesses. Others, the NCAA brought live here for us to question, and I'm glad they did, because some of the things that Shep Cooper admitted, and Angie Creeders admitted, Dennis Thomas admitted, Some of those things that were admitted, those were very important to your findings in this case. And they brought those people out because I couldn't subpoena them. And they wanted to ask questions of them too. But I think all those witnesses made our points, not theirs. Oh, wow. So March 3, the morning after, actually the afternoon after the conference call on March 2 at 7:30 p.m., Roscoe Howard to Rodney Uphoff. You really know how to prime the pump, my man. Nice job. I feel like I have been watching the master at work with you and this committee. And Eleanor Myers and Thomas and everybody said, Rodney Uphoff wasn't influential in this whole thing. Are you kidding me? The way the wind blows. And Rodney Uphoff responds, as the latest email from Eleanor Myers shows, the battle isn't over. What is Rodney Uphoff doing in the battle at all? And we know what he's battling for, which is to nail McNair and increase those penalties against USC. And the battle against that is people that are saying no. The evidence is not necessary, is not adequate. You only have a battle when there's two sides, right? So he's battling for what he wants, which is increased penalties against USC. Then, Eleanor Myers, I'm becoming increasingly uneasy with conducting our deliberations by email, particularly as it concerns Todd McNair. Well, I can understand that now, can't you? I mean, up to March 5th, we have all these emails that show what was going on. Imagine if we didn't have the emails. They just get on the witness stand and say what they want to say, and we're just sitting there saying, okay, well. Personally, I would like to have another call, perhaps for half an hour, to discuss Todd McNair. Okay, so the first question on the verdict form for you is this one. Did the NCAA make any statements of fact about Todd McNair to persons other than Todd of any of the following? The infractions report on June 10, the statement of Mark Emmert on December 15, or, look at the or the Infractions Appeals Committee report of 2011. Here's the part of the infractions report that is about Todd. The answer to your question should be yes. I think that all three of those documents and comments were comments that were being made about Todd McNair, statements of fact about him. They were wrong, but we'll get to that question in a second. The statements of fact were made. I think that's an easy one for you to answer. By the way, there are two burdens of proof in this case. One of them, on some of the questions, is called beyond a, not beyond, there's no, none that says beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a criminal standard. That's very, very high. One of them is what is more likely than not. What probably happened. The other one that some of the questions have is clear and convincing evidence. I think the evidence in this case, every bit of it, has been clear, and every ounce of it has been convincing. And I can tell by your reactions to the evidence as we went along that you saw that it was clear. We had to work to make it clear sometimes, but it was clear and it was convincing. And that evidence comes out of emails and out of the difference in the penalties from before and after they found Todd McNair. So that's your question number one. Question two. With respect to the statements for which you answered yes in question one, did the people to whom the statements were made reasonably understand that any of the statements were about Todd McNair? Of course. Who else? Reggie Bush's coach. I mean, they write it in there as assistant football coach one, but everybody knew who that was. Everybody knew what this was about. That's why people were throwing junk on their front yard after this came out, because they thought Todd McNair had hurt USC football. It's why when he goes now to interview with the Arizona Cardinals, he was asked about the NCAA investigation. It's because everybody knew this was about Todd McNair. There have been enough articles and stories about it. They knew. Plus, he's a public figure. People want to get their picture taken with Todd McNair all the time. And you put Todd McNair with Faison Love, and you're appealing to the whole community because you've got Faison, and then you've got the sports guy, Todd McNair. I mean, come on now. Of course, the answer to this is yes. Question 3, with respect to the statements for which you answered yes, in question 2, were any of the statements false? Of course they were. Todd McNair did not have the phone call as they described it. Todd McNair did not know about the benefits of the agency agreement. Todd McNair did not do unethical conduct. Todd McNair did not know what they said he did. Repeatedly, they put things into that report that was defamatory, factually, about Todd McNair. I'll tell you something else. Remember the linchpin? The linchpin to the whole COI finding against Todd McNair was that one phone call. Rodney Uphoff admitted that to the Infractions Appeals Committee, and he admitted that on the witness stand. Without that phone call, they had bupkis. I never knew what bupkis was, but it's supposed to be a pretty good word to describe. They had nothing. I hope it's not foul language. Okay. The second question is similar, but a bit different, is with respect to the statements for which you answered yes in question 3, did Todd McNair prove by clear and convincing evidence that the NCAA knew any of the statements were false? I think they did, because somebody at the NCAA wrote the evidence, changed it, so that they could write it in a way that supported what they were saying. So they knew the statements were false, or one of them, or some of them. It doesn't have to be all the statements. Or had serious doubts about the truth of any of the statements. They all had serious doubts about the truth of the statements. You see it in the emails, but you know that they had doubt about it because they wrote the report changing the evidence because they doubted the evidence in the record that they had. They wouldn't have had to change the report, to change the evidence if they were confident of what they had. So either way, it's by clear and convincing evidence, clearly and convincingly, that that's what happened. They knew. So let's just take a quick look. We saw this before, what the NCAA said Lake said versus what Lake said. They said that Lake phoned the assistant football coach to ask him to intercede with student athlete 1, Reggie, and get him to adhere to the agency agreement. And that he did not intend to lose money he had given Reggie and his parents and preferred not to go public. Well, that's just not what he said. Those are false facts. What he said was, you've seen it, I'm not going to go through it again. He adopted that McNair had called him. And worse yet, he gave McNair a reason for calling him, and McNair didn't call him at 1:34 in the morning. So they didn't have the evidence. So going back to it again, they pressed it. They tried to get the evidence, and look at what they got to. And why do you say that? There's no doubt he knew about this whole thing, says Link. There's no doubt about it. Well, and why do you say that? Yeah, we need to know why you believe that he knew about all this. They know that the phone call is not getting it, because he was around a lot. Aisha Jones said that she had never even heard the name McNair, and that was Lake's girlfriend. Because he was around a lot, and it's like he watched me get them guys, his friends, hotel rooms, and then look at this. Reggie told me he knew about certain things he was doing, but he's cool. You know what I mean? It's like basically through Reggie. Reggie said because I told Reggie you shouldn't be having, and he said, no, he's cool, he's a coach, he's my friend. Well, remember that when they interviewed Reggie Bush, Reggie said, I never told him anything about Blake. There was no reason for him to know anything about Blake. I didn't tell him about any benefits I was getting or anything. I didn't tell Todd McNair anything about this. So they take all the evidence and throw it aside and then create evidence for their report. There is no evidence that Todd McNair knew. This was the really tricky thing. Remember earlier I said, remember that line where Creeders admitted that Maisha Jones, the girlfriend, she admitted that she was not there for a phone call. Okay? Well, if you look at the report, you'll see agency partner A's former girlfriend confirmed Blake's account of the call. And then they have a few quotes from her interview, but nowhere do they put, but you know, we do have to tell you, at least in a footnote, she did say in her interview she wasn't there for the call. So they made it look like something it wasn't, to support the evidence that they were making up. That's not the way this should be done. So then what they do next is they say, you know, this is where they ask the question about McNair makes a call to you at 2:32. Yeah, that was like him trying. So this is that full page. Because he was around a lot. Then we go to the next page and they switch over to socialize, October 29th, the Marshall Falk party in San Diego. They're talking about different things. They're completely away from the phone call at 1:30 in the morning. Then on the next page, Angie Creeders asked, did you ever call McNair? Answer, yes, I called him a couple of times. Well, he didn't call a couple of times. The records show it was only one time, and that one time is the one we've been talking about that he got wrong, because he doesn't remember what was in that call either, and he had an agenda anyway. And that was January of '06. Yeah, well, there were no 2 calls in January of '06. He was making that up too. And when did you say you went back to jail? January 18th. And then Angie Creeders admitted that in reviewing all the information, that he, meaning Blake, was keeping all of this quite secret. That's how he and Reggie wanted it to happen. They weren't telling Todd McNair what was going on. It would have been an NCAA violation, and Todd McNair would have had to report it. It was secret. As he said somewhere else, like a drug. October 29, the Washington State game. They make a big deal out of the 3 phone calls in a 17-minute period where they ignore all the other phone calls that day. And Todd McNair got on the witness stand and put it all in context for you. And the context was Percy Harvin was here. He was cooling his heels in the hotel room. They needed to get Reggie to go get him. And Reggie's phone was dying. He was apparently with Lloyd Lake, and he gave Lloyd Lake's phone number to Todd. Todd makes the call. Those are the only 3 phone calls in all these phone records, other than the one on January 8th. Now, if these guys are buds, if they're pals, if they hang together, wouldn't you see at least 1 other phone call somewhere and not 3 for 1 minute in a 17-minute period when they're trying to get Reggie hooked up with the #1 recruit in the country, Percy Harvin? But no, they wouldn't accept that. You know, one of the comments, one of them said was he was explaining everything away. Well, of course he was. He was explaining what happened. What, does he have to answer to the COI that he's lying, even if he's not? Is he required to say, yes, you're right, I knew Lloyd Lake, and I knew all of this, even if he didn't, in order to make them happy? There was another one that was a coup de grace moment. Angie Creeders. So the statement in the COI report that Lake said that he called McNair and what he told McNair on the call was factually inaccurate, correct? Answer, yes, it was. It was a paraphrase from the interview. And I wasn't going to go with this paraphrase thing, because there's no paraphrase. It's a reversal of the evidence. So I said, it was factually inaccurate, correct? And she said yes. And by the way, if you do read the late summary of the late interview, over 100 pages, but if you do read the late interview, you'll see all kinds of stuff in there about San Diego and the Marshall Falk Party. You heard a little bit about that. You can take all that and put it in a little bag and place it in the nearest shredder. And the reason I can tell you that is even the committee that was looking for a way to hook Todd McNair, they even said the committee concludes that the evidence presented regarding San Diego, the March 2005 birthday party weekend, that's the Falk Party, that the evidence presented contained unresolved discrepancies in what witnesses reported regarding the events and who was present during the birthday party. So the birthday party has no finding about it. There wasn't enough evidence about it. There actually wasn't enough evidence about any of this, especially about that phone call. Here he is. Angie Creeders. And Lake said that when he would bring that money, it would be very secretive, right? The money that he would bring to Reggie Bush. He described it like a drug deal, so secretive that he didn't want anybody to know what was going on. Yes, that's what I just said. They didn't tell Todd McNair. They weren't going to risk him reporting this. And this is where Uphoff admitted that the issue about the phone call is the linchpin of the decision of the COI regarding Todd McNair. He said, I think that's a fair statement. Without that, they didn't have anything. And with it, they were changing the evidence. So there's an affirmative defense that has not been met. An affirmative defense means the NCAA can raise the defense of truth if they can prove. The NCAA is not responsible for Todd McNair's harm if it proves that its statement about Todd McNair were true or substantially true. Well, you know, it's interesting. They seem to be relying on those statements from the hearing, but remember, the court told you that those statements are not offered for the truth of the matter. They are not offered for the truth of the matter asserted. They are offered just for the state of mind of the COI at the time. So therefore, they have produced not one shred of evidence in this case that the statements they made about Todd McNair were true. The only person that took the witness stand and talked about those statements was Todd McNair, under oath. Not just an interview with certain people excluded, Todd McNair. And he told you the truth. This is the law that if they prove it, it's an affirmative defense. If they prove that it's true, they haven't proved the statements that they made in the COI report about Todd true at all. And in fact, in one of them, Angie Creeders admits that it's inaccurate factually. So with respect to the statements for which you answered yes in question 2, are any of these statements false? Yes. And then question 4, did Todd McNair prove by clear and convincing evidence that the NCAA knew any of the statements were false or had serious doubts about the truth of any of the statements? Yes. So far you're just going right down with yeses supported by the evidence we produced in this case. Now let me point something else out. Remember, once the draft report is done and ready to be published, before they publish it, remember they send it back to enforcement to be reviewed for factual inaccuracies? Now, how does this happen? The COI, somebody there writes a report that's false based on the evidence that was given them in the record. Then it goes over to enforcement, and enforcement that did the interviews is supposed to check it for factual inaccuracies, and they send it back and say it's fine. And then the IAC says, oh, okay. Mr. Thompson tries to point out the problem with the report, and it's going nowhere because, boom, rubber stamp. Okay, so the penalties against USC before the COI made its decision regarding McNair, remember? Postseason ban for 1 season, and a total of 6 scholarships lost, 3 a year for 2 years. Then they decide on McNair. And there was some malarkey about they were thinking about a TV ban. They weren't thinking about that in the proposed penalties before they found against Todd. So if they ever did discuss a TV ban, well, remember, I think it was Brian Halloran who said on the witness stand here that that's never realistic. They just can't do something like that. After the COI made its decision regarding McNair, 2 seasons of a postseason football ban, that costs the school a lot of money. Each one of those bowls brings in a lot of money. And 30 scholarships, 10 a year, lost for 3 years. They'll never admit, and they will always claim that that change had nothing to do with the finding against Todd McNair. Oh, come on now. You don't need a weatherman to know which way to look. And this is where Howard is saying TV ban was unrealistic. And then Dennis Thomas admitted this on the stand. Could the committee have made the kind of sanctions it issued against USC, the institution, without finding Mr. McNair as having committed misconduct of some sort? And the answer is, not to my knowledge. They needed to nail a coach with knowledge of what was going on in order to elevate the sanctions against USC. Question number 5. Are the statements the kind, because of the facts noted that people who heard or read them, the kind that would tend to injure Todd McNair in his occupation? Well, what do you think? Is there any question that these statements would injure Todd McNair in his occupation? Amin Najjar. As you said, when a coach is found to have committed unethical conduct, you knew he was likely to be terminated or not have his contract renewed, correct? Correct. You also knew that when coaches have unethical conduct findings against them, it's more difficult for them to find a job coaching in football, correct? Correct. Amin Najjar, and in fact, you're aware of individuals who have had unethical conduct findings against them who have never been able to find jobs in college coaching, correct? I am aware of those instances or certain instances. And you understood that it could have a severe impact on his career, correct? Yes, yes. And you understood it could have a severe impact on his life, yes. What you were talking about here was potentially changing the course of the coach's career, right? Yes, it's very significant. We take it very seriously, Angie Cruz. And then Joe Patuto, do you agree that it can be a career-ending finding for a coach? I agree that it's possible, given whatever the facts were and the severity of the violations. And then, of course, Roscoe Howard in that rant says he should be fired, as well as eliminate his chances for coaching anywhere else if he persists in lying. There you go. If he admits that he knew Lloyd Lake and he knew what was going on, then maybe. But he's not going to admit to something that's not true. So the answer to question number 5 is yes, it would injure him in his occupation. Question 6, with respect to the statements for which you answered yes, did Todd McNair suffer harm to his property, business, profession, or occupation? That's an easy one. Yes. Number 7, with respect to the statements for which you answered yes, was the NCAA's conduct a substantial factor in causing Todd McNair's actual harm? Absolutely. It was totally a substantial factor, not some trivial factor. They attacked the man's reputation in his chosen field. So what should you do? What should the award be? Notice I say award. This is not a reward. It is an award that you assess in damages. Now, you know, as Todd said on the stand, it's not about the money. It's never been about the money. But I'm here to tell you right now, if you don't assess a proper sum of money against the NCAA, they will never get the message. It is your job to assess how much harm has been done to this man. The law says that he's entitled to cover if he proves it is more likely true than not true that the NCAA's wrongful conduct was a substantial factor. That the damages include harm to Todd McNair's business, trade, profession, or occupation. We know about that. Harm to Todd McNair's reputation. We know about that. Shame, mortification, or hurt feelings. We know about that. You saw it in this stand. I couldn't have. You would not. So let's talk about the earnings. Remember Dr. Faluzis was here? And he took statistics from coaches all over the country and everything, and he put it all together for you. And what he said was the past loss of earnings going back to the time that he was at SC, and by the way, you know that Lane Kiffin would have kept him if this hadn't happened. How do you know that? The wind blows. When Lane Kiffin comes in, he gets rid of all but two coaches. One of them is his friend Todd McNair, from when they coached together at SC earlier. Lane Kiffin comes in as head coach. He has Todd McNair coaching the spring game. And then he has Todd McNair out recruiting in the spring. You're not going to send Todd McNair out to recruit players that you want if you're not going to keep him. Because Todd McNair would then, if he left and he goes to Oregon State University, he's got the connections with the players that USC wants. You know he would still have that job. Not today, but for a while. But you also know the way these coaches move around, especially the ones that are good recruiters, they get picked up by the schools that want good recruiters that are good coaches, and he had coached the Heisman Trophy winner. And he had brought in Joe McKnight, and he had brought in other players, and a lot of his running backs that he coached were in the NFL. That's what the elite Power 5 schools want, and he wanted Todd McNair except radioactive now. You know he'd be working now. You know these numbers are very conservative. Why? We only took him to age 65. We gave him offset earnings of $80,000 a year, even though he hasn't worked much since this happened. That brought the numbers down. And we didn't even assume that he would become a coordinator or a head coach. So you're not limited to these numbers. If you think it would have earned more than this, you're entitled to put that down. You assess him. You ask yourself, the guy that you saw up here on the stand, is that the kind of guy that somebody would one day want to be their offensive coordinator or maybe their head coach? Does he have the personality, the humor, the wit, the smarts, the history, the career, the commitment, the hard work, the desire, the caring about his players, the caring about his school, the caring about his fellow coaches? So if you think that's too low, you go ahead. We were very conservative with this. Remember, this one was assuming he stays in the 75th percentile over time for the pass, and this assumes he dropped down to the 50th. He wasn't going to drop down to the 50th percentile, but we're being conservative. Future loss of earnings, playing it out to the future, till age 65. You remember, that put us at 4.7 million, down to 3.8 million, 75th percentile, 50th percentile. All of these have been reduced to present value. All of these have been reduced by an offset for his damages. In other words, what he could earn, like he's going to start earning in the fall at the school. Okay? So, you pick out, I would suggest you pick out 4.7, 2.2, you add them together, and there's only going to be one line for damages in this case. You're going to have to do some adding and stuff. But I suggest you take those figures, because I think those are the fairest ones of all. You add them together for that piece. That's the loss of income, earning capacity into the future. Non-economic damages. mental suffering, loss of enjoyment of life, inconvenience, grief, anxiety, humiliation, emotional distress. Boy, doesn't every one of those words under the law apply to what's happened to him? He was on top of the world. He and Lynette were on top of the world, respected in the community, a hero to everybody, very successful football coach, very successful recruiter at one of the top football powers in the country. And they just and he did some drinking. And for somebody who's got the problem of drinking, and some people do, nothing can set them off to that like being stuck with something like this. Because one of the most important thing we have is our families. The next is our reputations. So then they say, well, he's not really mitigating his damages. Mitigating means reducing his damages. He didn't try hard enough to get a job. Well, he made efforts and ended up losing all faith when his own alma mater would not take him, Temple, when the coach of Temple, the head coach, wanted him. So I think he's tried to mitigate his damage. And remember, we built in an $80,000 a year number into the past loss anyway, to make sure that you knew that that would have been his earning capacity, given that he was so close to being a college graduate. Statistically, that's where it would have put him. And so we backed that out of the numbers too, trying to be conservative. But I'll tell you something else he's doing to try to mitigate his damages. And you're part of it. He set out on a journey shortly after the Infractions Appeals Committee would not listen to Scott Thompson and overturned this whole thing. And he started on a journey to clear his name. He's been trying to mitigate this damage that they did to him, and they have never apologized, and they have never withdrawn these findings and said, we got it wrong, ever. So he's trying to mitigate his damages right here in this. What are Todd McNair's actual damages? Okay, so here's what you have to do. You take the number for the earnings, losses, past and future. If you think they should be higher, you can do that. Lower, you can do that. Either way, we're right on the button with what Dr. Fergus has said. Then you have to address the human damages. Earnings is one thing. Loss of reputation, anxiety, emotional distress, that's another. And look at what he's been through. I mean, what came out of him on the witness stand says more than I could ever say. You all were right up front close in seeing what this has done to this proud man, with this proud history and career. So the value of a reputation, I mean, you know, I could tell you award him $100 million. The value of a reputation. But I'm not going to tell you that. Here's what I suggest you do. For the last 7 years, as he's been carrying on this fight, and as he's had this wrapped around his neck, trying to explain to friends and family and others and people that he meets that no, they got it wrong, I didn't know, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to suggest that you award him $1 million a year for every one of those years that he's been dealing with this so far. That would be $7 million. So you would take the amount defined for loss of earnings and earning capacity, you add $7 million for the past 7 years. But you're also going to get a jury instruction about the next 28 years. And that's because even though your verdict will clear his name by saying these were false facts and this was done in a bad way to this guy, even though the jury will have spoken, there are still people that he's going to have to deal with. But at least he will have your verdict to hold up and say, but here's the truth of the matter, the jury found it, but it'll always be on the internet, you'll always be dealing with it, it'll be there forever. That's why you're being instructed that his life expectancy is another 28 years. Because what we just talked about with the $7 million for his non-economic damages, for the human damages, is the past 7 years. But you need to put something on for the next. Well, I personally think that your verdict, and I'm confident what y'all are going to do, that your verdict will relieve a lot of the anxiety. And he'll be able to proudly go out to that first football game with Brother Christian and be proud and not have to worry about people saying things. But he'll still have some of that for the rest of his life. So what I suggest is for those 28 years, you take the equivalent amount for the last 7 years, $7 million, and you make that the compensation for the next 28. It's much less than the $1 million a year. It's actually probably a quarter of that. But it does recognize that even with your verdict, it's not completely solved. It's going to be what they did to him, it's going to be with him for the rest of his life. So, in essence, I think your number here should be approximately, and you figure it out, $27 million for the total of the earnings, the past emotional side of this, and the future emotional and reputational side of this. Whatever it is, it's your verdict. You may think that's too low, you may think that's too high. I think it's kind of right spot on, but you all figure it out, the 12 of you. Last question is, did Todd McNair prove by clear and convincing evidence that the NCAA acted with malice, oppression, or fraud? These are the answers that lead ultimately to punitive damages. Punitive damages are from the word punish, where on top of what they have to pay him for what he did, you would be ultimately assessing punitive damages. And in order to show that, we have to show by clear and convincing evidence that the NCAA acted with malice, oppression, or fraud. And again, that's by clear and convincing evidence. And I think the evidence has been phenomenally clear and astoundingly convincing, especially watching how the NCAA witnesses tried to avoid the evidence. Malice. Now, the word is malice, but you know, we tend to think of that word as malicious, like they were out to stab him or something like that. That's not what it means in the law. It's a word that has a definition. Put the word aside and use the definition. Malice in the law is a willful and knowing disregard of the rights or safety of another. Well, that applies to what happened here. They threw him under the bus because they were heading to the SC big sanctions. The person acts with knowing disregard when he or she is aware of the probable dangerous consequences of his or her conduct and deliberately fails to avoid those consequences. That absolutely applies to what happened here. So if you use the definition of malice under the law, this was malice. They knew the consequences. They knew what they were doing. They knew it at the enforcement staff. They knew it at the COI when they rewrote the evidence to fit their needs. Enforcement staff knew it the second time when they looked and found factual inaccuracies and didn't do anything about it. And then the IAC, another agency of the NCAA, comes in and says, yep, it's fine, stamp of approval. 4 times. Malice. Oppression is and by the way, it's malice, oppression, or fraud, not malice, oppression, and fraud. Okay? So if you find any one of these, I think you'll find all 3 of these, malice, oppression, and fraud, but you just need to find one of them. Oppression is defined as conduct that was despicable and subjected Todd McNair to cruel and unusual hardship and knowing disregard of his rights. Absolutely. That's what we've proven. Clear, convincing evidence. Despicable conduct is conduct that is so vile, base, or contemptible that it would be looked down on and despised by reasonable people. That's the conduct that they did here. fraud means intentionally misrepresented or concealed a material fact and did so intending to harm Todd McNair. Think of the things that they hid. Number one, Joe Patudo and her bias. They didn't tell them about that. Didn't tell Todd and Scott Thompson about that. Number two, Shep Cooper and his bias already expressed 2 years before this investigation came to him. 2008, during the investigation. Number three, the fact that they went outside the record to get the dog information. Didn't tell them anything about that. You could probably find all kinds of stuff in here. When they didn't tell them a material fact, they didn't tell them because they were trying to get to the result they wanted against USC, and Todd McNair was the stepping stone to get there. And then Mark Emmert approving of it all on December 15, 2010. And then on the video, even a couple of months ago when we took his deposition, he says once again, yes, we approve everything that was done. That's called ratifying the conduct that is this despicable. And what's unbelievable about that is that's after we had all these emails and this testimony, and he knew all this information that had come out in this lawsuit, and he still says, boom, stamp of approval. That's what happens when an organization has unbridled power over people's lives. They gave power to Lloyd Lake over Todd McNair. You can give Todd McNair power over the NCAA. You know, we covered this Joe Patudo stuff. Did Todd McNair prove by clear and convincing evidence in the NCAA committed malice, oppression, and fraud? Any of the three? I think all. The answer is yes. Okay. There's you the verdict form. 9 questions, and I think you answered every one of them yes. Because whether the burden is more likely than not, or clear and convincing evidence, every issue in this case has been proven by Todd McNair by clear and convincing evidence. Everyone, even when he wasn't required to do that. And I'll tell you something else. When they were doing their work, they did not have evidence of the kind on which reasonably prudent persons rely in the conduct of serious affairs like a man's occupation and reputation and a university's standing and